Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror of divine truth, the Lord of Shadows, in the cosmic twilight between creation and destruction, where all possibilities exist simultaneously, in the eternal moment before divine will crystallizes reality from infinite chaos. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, sits upon his obsidian throne, contemplating the endless dance of order and disorder that shapes existence itself. His single remaining foot, the other devoured by the primordial earth monster during the violent birth of the world, rests upon the coiled body of a serpent, whose eyes reflect fragments of futures that may never come to pass, while its scales shimmer with memories of worlds that once were but are no more. The obsidian mirror that serves as his sacred emblem and primary manifestation reflects not merely physical appearances, but reveals the hidden truths that lie beneath surface illusions, exposing the fundamental nature of reality, while demonstrating the intimate connection between reflection and revelation, shadow and substance, the visible and the invisible, that governs all cosmic processes. This divine mirror, crafted from volcanic glass that emerges from the Earth's molten heart, possesses the spiritual power to penetrate veils of deception, while revealing both the divine spark and the shadow essence that exist within every created being. The smoking that perpetually rises from the mirror's surface consists not of ordinary combustion, but of materialized spiritual energy that bridges the gap between earthly and celestial realms, while carrying prayers, curses, and divine communications across dimensional boundaries that separate mortal consciousness from cosmic awareness. The patterns that form within this sacred smoke contain encrypted messages that can be decoded by trained priest shamans, whose years of study have prepared them to interpret the complex symbolic language through which divine wisdom is transmitted to human understanding. The duality that characterizes Tezcatlipoca's nature reflects fundamental cosmic principles that govern all existence through the interplay of opposing forces, whose dynamic tension creates the energy necessary for life, growth, change, and spiritual evolution. As both creator and destroyer, benefactor and adversary, light bringer and darkness dealer, this deity embodies the essential truth that all apparent opposites are merely different aspects of single underlying reality that transcends human categories of good and evil, beneficial and harmful, sacred and profane. The nocturnal associations that connect Tezcatlipoca to darkness, night, and the hidden realms of existence reveal his role as guardian of mysteries that cannot be comprehended through ordinary daylight consciousness, but require descent into shadow territories of awareness, where conventional logic gives way to intuitive wisdom and direct spiritual perception. The darkness that he governs is not the absence of light, but the pregnant void from which all illumination emerges, while containing infinite potential for both creation and destruction that exceeds human capacity to control or predict. The jaguar symbolism that frequently appears in representations of Tezcatlipoca connects his divine essence to the great cats, whose nocturnal hunting abilities, stealth techniques, and predatory excellence make them perfect earthly representatives of divine power that operates through stealth, cunning, and sudden manifestation of overwhelming force. The spotted pelts that distinguish jaguars reflect the star pattern that dots the night sky, while their ability to move silently through dense vegetation mirrors the deity's capacity for remaining invisible until the moment dramatic revelation or intervention. The shamanic traditions that invoke Tezcatlipoca's assistance for divination, healing, and transformation require practitioners to confront their own shadow aspects, while accepting the spiritual challenges and psychological trials that accompany any serious attempt to access divine wisdom through direct communication with cosmic forces that operate beyond conventional moral categories and social expectations. The initiation processes that prepare shamans for this work include psychological death and rebirth experiences that dissolve ego boundaries while establishing new identity structures capable of channeling divine energy without being destroyed by its intensity. The warfare connections that link Tezcatlipoca to military conflict and strategic planning reflect his role as patron of warriors, whose success depends upon understanding enemy weaknesses, exploiting tactical opportunity, and maintaining psychological advantages that enable smaller forces to defeat larger armies through superior intelligence and spiritual preparation. The divine guidance that this deity provides to military commanders includes both practical tactical insights and spiritual protection that can turn the tide of battle through supernatural intervention and cosmic support. The political implications of Tezcatlipoca worship include recognition that earthly power inevitably involves moral ambiguity, ethical compromise, and acceptance of responsibilities that require leaders to make decisions whose consequences extend far beyond immediate circumstances, while affecting the spiritual as well as material welfare of communities whose survival depends upon effective governance that balances competing interests and conflicting demands. The artistic representations of Tezcatlipoca throughout Mesoamerican cultural traditions emphasize his role as divine trickster, whose apparently malevolent actions often serve beneficial purposes that become apparent only after extended periods of suffering, testing, and spiritual development have revealed the wisdom hidden within seemingly destructive experiences. The complex iconography associated with this deity includes symbols of transformation, mirrors, smoke, jaguar, and severed feet that communicate theological concepts about the relationship between appearance and reality, suffering and wisdom, destruction and renewal, that characterizes cosmic processes. The philosophical teachings associated with Tezcatlipoca emphasize the importance of accepting life's inherent uncertainty, while developing spiritual strength and psychological flexibility that enable individuals to respond effectively to unexpected challenges and dramatic changes in circumstance. The divine tests that this deity imposes upon human consciousness serve not to punish, but to strengthen through creating opportunities for spiritual growth that would be impossible under comfortable conditions, where character development and wisdom acquisition are rarely necessary for survival. The mirror of truth, the obsidian scrying mirrors that served as primary instruments for communicating with Tezcatlipoca, were crafted from volcanic glass, whose natural formation process connected these divination tools to the Earth's molten core, where the raw creative and destructive forces the planet maintained their eternal struggle between order and chaos. The polishing techniques that transformed rough obsidian into perfectly reflective surfaces required both technical skill and spiritual preparation, as the artisans who created these sacred mirrors understood that they were constructing instruments capable of revealing divine truth, rather than merely manufacturing decorative objects or practical tools. The spiritual preparation that preceded the creation of sacred mirrors included purification rituals, fasting period, and bloodletting ceremonies that aligned the craftsman's consciousness with divine will, while ensuring that their personal energy would not contaminate the mirror's ability to serve as clear conduits for cosmic communication. The workshops where these mirrors were manufactured were treated as temple spaces, where every action carried religious significance, while the techniques employed combined practical knowledge with mystical understanding of the relationship between physical reflection and spiritual revelation. The consecration ceremonies that transformed finished mirrors into active spiritual instruments involved complex rituals that invoked Tezcatlipoca's presence, while establishing protective barriers that prevented malevolent entities from using the mirrors for harmful purposes. The priests who conducted these ceremonies possessed detailed knowledge of invocation techniques, banishing procedures, and spiritual diagnostics that enabled them to identify and eliminate any negative influences that might interfere with accurate divination or divine communication. The divination procedures that utilized Tezcatlipoca's mirrors required practitioners to enter altered states of consciousness through meditation, sensory deprivation, or plant medicine consumption that enabled perception of symbolic images and cosmic information that appeared within the mirror's reflective surface. The interpretation of these visions demanded years of training in symbolic language, mythological knowledge, and psychological understanding that qualified priest-diviners to translate divine communications into practical guidance for individuals and communities seeking supernatural assistance. The types of information that could be accessed through mirror divination included prophecies about future events, revelations about hidden aspects of current situations, guidance for important decisions, and spiritual diagnoses that identified the metaphysical causes of physical ailments or social problems. The accuracy of these divinations depended upon the spiritual development of the practitioner, the purity of their intention, and their ability to distinguish between authentic divine communication and psychological projections or wishful thinking that could distort perception and lead to incorrect interpretation. The protective procedures that accompanied mirror divination included purification rituals before and after scrying sessions, protective circles that prevented unwanted spiritual intrusion, and banishing techniques that could eliminate negative energies that might be attracted to the open portal between dimensions that active mirrors create. The practitioners who specialized in mirror divination understood that these instruments were potentially dangerous, as well as beneficial, requiring careful handling and spiritual protection to prevent harmful consequences for themselves and their client. The group divination sessions that brought together multiple practitioners for collective scrying created enhanced communication capabilities, while providing mutual support and verification that increased accuracy while reducing risks associated with individual practice. These group sessions often coincided with important religious festivals or political crises, when communities required divine guidance for crucial decisions that would affect many lives while determining collective destiny during periods of uncertainty and change. The training requirements for mirror divination practitioners included not only technical instruction in scrying techniques, but also extensive education in psychology, medicine, astronomy, and religious doctrine that qualified them to provide comprehensive guidance that addressed both spiritual and practical aspects of human problems. The master diviners who taught these skills emphasized ethical conduct and service orientation, while discouraging use of divination abilities for purely personal gain or harmful manipulation of others. The maintenance procedures that preserved mirrors' spiritual effectiveness included regular cleansing rituals, proper storage techniques, and periodic reconsecration ceremonies that renewed the divine connection while eliminating accumulated negative energies that could interfere with accurate perception. The mirrors that remained in use for extended periods often developed enhanced sensitivity and reliability that reflected the accumulated spiritual energy of successful divination sessions and divine communications. The international reputation that Aztec mirror divination achieved throughout Mesoamerica attracted students and clients from distant regions who sought training in these techniques while requesting guidance about important personal and political matters. The cultural exchange that resulted from this widespread interest enriched local divination traditions, while spreading Tezcatlipoca's influence throughout the region and establishing networks of spiritual practitioners who maintained communication despite political boundaries and cultural differences. The historical documentation that preserves information about mirror divination practices includes both indigenous codices and Spanish colonial records that provide insights into techniques, beliefs, and cultural contexts that shaped these spiritual technologies. The archaeological evidence that supports this textual information includes actual obsidian mirrors found in ceremonial contexts, along with associated ritual objects and architectural features that demonstrate the importance of Tezcatlipoca worship throughout Mesoamerican history. The contemporary revival of interest in Tezcatlipoca's mirror divination reflects modern recognition of indigenous spiritual wisdom, while providing alternative approaches to psychological insight and spiritual development. that complement conventional therapeutic methods and religious practices. The practitioners who study these ancient techniques often adapt traditional methods to contemporary circumstances, while maintaining respect for cultural origins and spiritual authenticity that honors the divine source of this wisdom. The cosmic trickster, the divine paradox that defines Tezcatlipoca's essential nature, manifests through his simultaneous role as both cosmic adversary and ultimate benefactor, whose apparently destructive actions often serve hidden purposes that become apparent only after extended periods of suffering and testing have revealed the spiritual growth and wisdom that emerge from confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges with courage, persistent faith in divine justice that transcends immediate appearances. The trickster aspects of Tezcatlipoca's character include his propensity for creating situations that force individuals and communities to confront their assumptions, overcome limitation, develop capabilities they never knew they possessed, while learning to distinguish between essential truth and surface illusion through direct experience, rather than theoretical knowledge. The divine tests that he imposes often involve role reversals, unexpected revelations, and dramatic irony that challenge conventional wisdom while revealing deeper truths about human nature and cosmic processes. The psychological functions that Trickster experiences include breaking down rigid mental patterns, dissolving ego attachments, and catalyzing personality integration through encounters with shadow aspects of consciousness that are normally repressed or denied. The therapeutic value of these confrontations lies in their ability to promote psychological wholeness and spiritual maturity through forcing recognition of internal contradictions and hidden motivations that influence behavior despite conscious attempts to maintain idealized self-images. The cultural roles that trickster deities fulfill within indigenous societies include serving as agents of innovation, adaptation, and social change, who prevent cultural stagnation through introducing new perspectives and challenging established traditions that may have outlived their usefulness. The stories and ceremonies associated with Tezcatlipoca often feature themes of transformation, boundary crossing, and the discovery of creative solutions to apparently impossible problems through unconventional thinking and willingness to question authority. The educational functions that trickster narratives perform include transmission of practical wisdom, moral instruction, and spiritual teaching through entertaining stories that engage listeners while conveying complex philosophical concepts and psychological insights that might be rejected if presented through direct instruction or formal doctrine. The humorous elements that characterize many trickster tales serve to disarm psychological resistance while facilitating deep learning through emotional engagement and memorable imagery. The shamanic traditions that invoke Tezcatlipoca's trickster energy for healing and transformation utilize techniques that deliberately create controlled chaos, therapeutic confusion, and strategic disorientation that break down pathological patterns while opening space for new possibilities and healthier ways of being. The practitioners who specialize in these approaches understand that genuine healing sometimes requires dismantling existing structures before reconstruction can begin, making temporary destabilization necessary for long-term improvement. The political implications of Tezcatlipoca's trickster nature include his role as patron of revolutionaries, rebels, and social reformers who challenge unjust systems and corrupt authorities through exposing hypocrisy, revealing hidden agendas, and creating situations that force acknowledgement of problems that would otherwise remain ignored or denied. The divine support that this deity provides for resistance movements reflects cosmic principles of justice that operate beyond human legal systems and social convention. The artistic expressions that capture Tezcatlipoca's trickster qualities include visual representations, theatrical performances, and literary works that utilize irony, satire, and paradox to communicate complex truths about human nature and social reality, while entertaining audiences through clever wordplay, unexpected plot developments, and symbolic imagery that operates on multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. The ritual applications of trickster energy include ceremonies that deliberately incorporate elements of surprise, confusion, and controlled disruption that shake participants out of ordinary consciousness, while creating conditions conducive to spiritual insight and personal transformation. The sacred clowns and ceremonial comedians who serve this function in various indigenous traditions understand that laughter and disruption can be as effective as solemnity, and order for achieving religious objectives. The moral ambiguity that characterizes Tezcatlipoca's trickster action reflects sophisticated understanding of ethical complexity that recognizes the limitations of simple categories like good and evil, while acknowledging that beneficial outcomes sometimes emerge from apparently harmful actions, and that necessary truths often come disguised as unwelcome challenges, uncomfortable revelations that force growth through difficulty rather than comfort. The initiatory aspects of trickster encounters include their function as tests of character, spiritual readiness, and psychological resilience that determine whether individuals are prepared for advanced spiritual responsibilities or leadership roles that require ability to navigate ambiguous situations while maintaining ethical principles despite pressure to compromise integrity for expedient solutions. The lessons learned through these experiences often prove essential for effective service to communities and cosmic purposes. The cross-cultural presence of trickster deities throughout world mythology suggests universal psychological and spiritual needs that these figures address, while demonstrating common patterns in human understanding of divine paradox, moral complexity, and the role of disruption in promoting growth and adaptation. The comparative study of trickster traditions reveals shared insights about consciousness, creativity, and change that transcend cultural boundaries, while respecting local variations and indigenous wisdom. The shadow teachings, the doctrine of necessary darkness, that forms a central component of Tezcatlipoca's theological teachings, challenges conventional religious emphasis on light, goodness, and purity by asserting that spiritual development requires direct confrontation with shadow aspects of existence that include suffering, conflict, moral ambiguity, and the acknowledgement of destructive impulses that exist within all conscious beings as essential components of complete psychological and cosmic awareness. The integration practices that enable individuals to work constructively with shadow elements include meditation techniques that explore suppressed emotions, artistic expressions that give form to unconscious content, and ritual activities that provide safe containers for experiencing and transforming negative energies into positive forces. The therapeutic approaches that incorporate shadow work recognize that psychological health requires acknowledging and integrating all aspects of personality, rather than attempting to eliminate or deny uncomfortable truths about human nature. The philosophical frameworks that support shadow work include understanding that consciousness exists in polar relationships, where light defines darkness, good gains meaning through contrast with evil, and creative potential emerges from the dynamic tension between opposing forces, rather than from static harmony or unchanging perfection. The wisdom traditions that embrace this perspective teach that spiritual maturity requires moving beyond simple dualistic thinking toward recognition of fundamental unity that underlies apparent opposition. The social applications of shadow teachings include recognition that healthy communities must acknowledge and address collective shadow elements, such as cultural traumas, systemic injustices, and group pathologies that operate beneath surface appearances, while influencing behavior through unconscious mechanisms that can only be transformed through conscious acknowledgement and deliberate intervention. The political implications of this understanding include support for truth and reconciliation processes that bring hidden conflicts into open discussion, rather than maintaining artificial harmony through denial and suppression.
The therapeutic modalities that utilize Tezcatlipoca's shadow teachings include depth psychology approaches that explore unconscious motivations, addiction treatment programs that address underlying spiritual emptiness, and trauma therapy techniques that help individuals integrate difficult experiences rather than remaining trapped by them. The healing practices that incorporate indigenous wisdom often combine modern psychological methods with traditional ceremonies that provide spiritual context and cultural support for transformation processes. The artistic traditions that express shadow teachings include dramatic presentations of moral conflict, visual arts that explore dark themes, and literary works that examine the complexity of human motivation, while revealing the hidden connections between apparent opposites. The aesthetic theories that support this approach recognize beauty in darkness, meaning in suffering, and creative potential in destruction, while maintaining balance through integration, rather than elimination of uncomfortable truths. The mystical experiences that involve encounters with Tezcatlipoca often include visions of personal shadow aspects, revelations about hidden motivations, and direct confrontation with fears and limitations that have previously remained unconscious or denied. The transformational value of these experiences lies in their capacity to promote psychological wholeness through integration of rejected aspects of self, while providing spiritual empowerment that comes from accepting complete responsibility for all dimensions of personal existence. The educational approaches that transmit shadow teachings include storytelling traditions that explore moral complexity, initiation ceremonies that involve controlled encounters with fear and difficulty, and mentorship relationships that provide guidance through periods of spiritual crisis and psychological integration. The wisdom that emerges from these educational processes often proves more valuable than knowledge acquired through purely intellectual study, because it has been earned through direct experience and personal transformation. The relationship between shadow work and spiritual development includes recognition that authentic spiritual growth requires moving beyond superficial religious practices toward direct engagement with the fundamental questions and challenges that shape human existence. The spiritual technologies that Tezcatlipoca represents offer alternatives to escapist religiosity, while providing practical methods for transforming suffering into wisdom, conflict into creativity, and fear into power through conscious engagement with darkness, rather than futile attempts to eliminate. The cultural preservation of shadow teachings includes maintaining indigenous wisdom traditions that honor the full spectrum of human experience, while resisting modern tendencies to sanitize spirituality through elimination of uncomfortable truths and challenging practices. The contemporary relevance of these teachings includes their application to modern psychological problems, social conflicts, and spiritual crises that require wisdom about working with rather than against the shadow dimensions of existence. The training requirements for practitioners who work with shadow teachings include personal experience with transformation processes, psychological education that provides understanding of unconscious dynamic, and spiritual development that enables safe navigation of dark territories without being overwhelmed or corrupted by negative forces. The ethical considerations that govern this work include maintaining clear boundaries, providing appropriate support for clients, and using shadow knowledge for healing rather than manipulation or harm. The integration of shadow teachings with other spiritual practices includes recognition that all authentic traditions contain wisdom about working with darkness, while maintaining specific cultural approaches that reflect local conditions and historical experience. The synthesis that emerges from cross-cultural study often reveals universal principles while respecting particular traditions and indigenous knowledge that has been tested through generations of practical application. The divine mirror's reflections, the cosmic function that mirrors serve with Tezcatlipoca's divine technology, extends far beyond simple reflection to encompass active transformation of consciousness through confrontation with authentic self-knowledge that penetrates illusions and reveals the fundamental nature of reality that exists beneath surface appearances and cultural conditioning. The spiritual mirrors that this deity employs operate as gateways between dimensions of existence, while providing access to information and energy that can catalyze profound personal and collective transformation. The metaphysical principles that govern mirror work include understanding that external reality reflects internal states of consciousness, while recognition of projection mechanisms enables withdrawal of unconscious content from environmental objects and relationships back into conscious awareness, where it can be examined, understood, and transformed through deliberate spiritual practice. The therapeutic applications of mirror work include techniques that utilize reflective surfaces for meditation, self-examination, and energy clearing that promote psychological integration and spiritual development. The ceremonials of mirrors in Tezcatlipoca worship include divination rituals that access prophetic information, healing ceremonies that diagnose spiritual ailment, and transformation practices that facilitate psychological depth and rebirth experiences through controlled encounters with shadow aspects of consciousness. The sacred mirrors employed in these practices often possessed specific powers and characteristics that reflected their creation circumstances, consecration procedures, and accumulated spiritual energy from successful ceremonial application. The symbolic meanings associated with mirrors in Aztec culture include their representation of divine consciousness, cosmic awareness, and the ability to perceive multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously, while maintaining awareness of the interconnections between apparently separate phenomena. The mirror symbolism that appears throughout Mesoamerican art and architecture communicates complex theological concepts about the relationship between perception and reality, self-knowledge and cosmic consciousness, individual identity and universal existence. The psychological dimensions of mirror work include confrontation with shadow aspects of personality, recognition of unconscious patterns that influence behavior, and integration of rejected or denied aspects of self into conscious awareness through direct experience, rather than theoretical understanding. The therapeutic value of mirror practices lies in their capacity to reveal hidden motivations, unconscious conflicts, and spiritual potentials that remain inaccessible through ordinary introspection or intellectual analysis. The shamanic applications of mirror technology include techniques for soul retrieval, entity communication, and interdimensional travel that utilize reflective surfaces as portals between different levels of reality, while providing protection and guidance for consciousness exploration that extends beyond normal perceptual boundaries. The practitioners who specialize in mirror shamanism often develop relationships with mirror spirits or consciousness entities that assist in ceremonial work, while providing ongoing guidance and protection during spiritual practice. The technological aspects of sacred mirror construction include selection of appropriate materials, proper timing of creation activities, and incorporation of specific energy patterns that enhance reflective capabilities, while ensuring spiritual protection for use. The quality of mirrors created through these traditional methods often exceeds modern equivalents in terms of spiritual effectiveness, despite lacking contemporary technical precision in terms of optical clarity or surface perfection. The training requirements for mirror work practitioners include development of psychic sensitivity, emotional stability, and spiritual discernment that enable safe navigation of consciousness territories revealed through mirror practice, while maintaining clear boundaries between different levels of reality. The educational processes that prepare individuals for advanced mirror work often require years of preliminary training in meditation, energy management, and psychological integration that provide necessary foundations for more intensive practice. The protective measures that accompany mirror work include purification rituals that clear accumulated negative energies, blessing ceremonies that invoke spiritual protection, banishing techniques that eliminate unwanted influences that may be attracted to active mirrors or vulnerable practitioners. The understanding that mirrors can serve as doorways for both beneficial and harmful energies requires careful attention to spiritual hygiene and energetic protection throughout all phases of mirror work. The group applications of mirror practices include collective divination sessions, community healing ceremonies, and group transformation work that utilizes the enhanced energy and protection available through cooperative spiritual practice, while providing mutual support and verification that increases accuracy and safety. The community aspects of mirror work often prove essential for addressing large-scale problems and collective shadow issues that exceed individual capacity to resolve through personal practice alone. The historical development of mirror traditions throughout Mesoamerica reflects continuous innovation and adaptation that incorporated new insights, while maintaining essential spiritual principles and protective procedures that had been validated through generations of practical application. The cultural exchange between different indigenous groups enriched local mirror traditions, while preserving distinctive regional approaches that reflected specific environmental conditions and cultural characteristics. The contemporary applications of Tezcatlipoca's mirror teachings include therapeutic approaches that utilize reflective meditation, psychological techniques that explore unconscious content, spiritual practices that promote self-knowledge through direct experience of authentic self, beyond social conditioning and cultural expectation. The modern practitioners who work with these ancient techniques often adapt traditional methods to contemporary contexts, while maintaining essential spiritual principles and protective procedures that ensure safe and effective practice.
The warrior's shadow. The military applications of Tezcatlipoca's teachings include strategic doctrines that emphasize psychological warfare, tactical flexibility, and the cultivation of spiritual power that enables warriors to overcome seemingly impossible odds through superior preparation, divine guidance, and acceptance of death that frees consciousness from fear-based limitations that compromise combat effectiveness and strategic thinking. The warrior priesthood that served Tezcatlipoca combined military training with spiritual development to create elite forces whose combat abilities were enhanced by supernatural powers derived from close relationship with divine consciousness that transcended ordinary human limitations, while providing access to strategic insights and protective energies unavailable to conventional soldiers who lacked spiritual preparation and divine connection. The training methods that prepared Tezcatlipoca's warriors included not only physical conditioning and weapons mastery, but also psychological techniques that developed mental toughness, emotional control, and spiritual awareness that enabled effective performance under extreme stress, while maintaining ethical principles despite the moral ambiguity inherent in warfare and the life or death decisions that combat situations require. The ritual preparations that preceded military campaigns included ceremonies that invoked Tezcatlipoca's protection and guidance, while seeking divine approval for military objectives and blessing for weapons and equipment that would be employed in combat operations. The spiritual preparation that accompanied these rituals included purification activities, meditation practices, and vision quests that aligned warrior consciousness with divine will, while ensuring that military actions would serve cosmic purposes rather than merely personal or political objectives. The psychological warfare techniques that Tezcatlipoca's followers employed included intimidation tactics that utilized supernatural reputation, psychological manipulation that exploited enemy fears and weaknesses, and strategic deception that confused opponents while concealing friendly intentions and capabilities until decisive moments, when surprise attacks could achieve maximum effect with minimum casualties among friendly forces. The leadership principles that governed warrior priests included emphasis on personal example, sacrifice for subordinates' wealth, and maintenance of morale through demonstration of supernatural protection and divine favor that convinced followers that their cause was righteous, while their ultimate victory was assured, despite temporary setbacks and apparent disadvantages in terms of numbers or equipment. The tactical innovations that emerged from Tezcatlipoca's military traditions included night fighting techniques, stealth operation, and coordinated attacks that utilized darkness and surprise to overcome enemies who possessed superior numbers or defensive advantages during conventional daylight battle. The special operations capabilities that these methods provided often proved decisive in conflicts where orthodox military approaches had failed to achieve strategic objectives. The intelligence gathering activities that supported Tezcatlipoca's military operations included reconnaissance missions, infiltration techniques, and information networks that provided commanders with detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities, intentions, and weaknesses, while maintaining operational security that protected friendly plans and movements from detection by hostile intelligence service. The weapons technologies that Tezcatlipoca's warriors employed often incorporated spiritual enhancements that increased effectiveness beyond purely physical capabilities, while providing psychological advantages that intimidated enemies and inspired friendly forces. The blessed weapons and sacred armor that these warriors carried served both practical, protective functions and symbolic purposes that demonstrated divine support
while channeling supernatural energies that enhanced combat performance. The post-combat procedures that followed military operations included purification rituals that cleansed warriors of spiritual contamination acquired through killing and destruction, thanksgiving ceremonies that honored divine assistance, while acknowledging the sacrifices made by fallen enemies and comrades, and integration activities that helped veterans process traumatic experiences, while maintaining psychological health despite exposure to extreme violence and stress. The ethical frameworks that guided Tezcatlipoca's warriors included recognition that warfare inevitably involves moral complexity and ethical compromise, while requiring acceptance of responsibility for both beneficial and harmful consequences of military action. The spiritual teachings that supported this understanding emphasized that warrior service represented cosmic duty that transcended personal preferences, while requiring complete commitment to divine purposes, regardless of individual cost or comfort. The legacy traditions that preserve knowledge of Tezcatlipoca's military wisdom include historical accounts, artistic representations, and ceremonial reenactments that maintain cultural memory of warrior achievements, while transmitting practical knowledge and spiritual understanding that were relevant for contemporary challenges, despite changes in technology and political circumstances that have transformed the external conditions under which military service is performed. The eternal dance, the cosmic choreography that governs the eternal relationship between Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, represents the fundamental dynamic tension between opposing forces, whose continuous interaction creates the energy necessary for maintaining universal order, while driving evolutionary processes that promote growth, change, and spiritual development throughout all levels of existence, from individual consciousness to galactic structures. The mythological narratives that describe divine conflicts between these two cosmic principles reveal sophisticated understanding of dialectical processes, wherein apparent opposition serves creative purposes through generating synthetic solutions that transcend original polarities, while incorporating essential elements from both sides of fundamental tensions that characterize existence at every scale of manifest. The historical cycles that reflect this divine dynamic include periods of cultural emphasis on warrior values, alternating with eras that prioritize scholarly achievement, times of expansion, balanced by phases of consolidation, and epochs of material focus, followed by spiritual renaissance, demonstrate how cosmic principles manifest through human social and cultural development across extended time periods that exceed individual lifespans, while revealing underlying patterns that connect personal experience to universal processes. The psychological applications of divine polarity teachings include therapeutic approaches that work with internal conflicts, through recognizing that apparent personality contradictions often represent different aspects of wholeness, seeking integration rather than pathological conditions, requiring elimination. The mental health practices that incorporate this understanding help individuals accept and work constructively with their own internal contradictions, while developing greater psychological flexibility and emotional resilience. The spiritual practices that honor both Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl include ceremonies that celebrate complementary aspects of divine consciousness, while seeking balance between opposing tendencies, through conscious integration, rather than unconscious dominance, by either pole of fundamental polarity. The wisdom traditions that maintain this balanced approach recognize that exclusive identification with either light or dark, order or chaos, creation or destruction, leads to spiritual imbalance and incomplete development. The artistic expressions that capture the eternal dance between cosmic opponents include visual representations of divine conflict, musical compositions that incorporate contrasting themes, and literary works that explore the creative potential inherent in opposition, while demonstrating how apparent enemies often serve as catalysts for each other's development and ultimate transformation. The philosophical implications of divine polarity include recognition that truth emerges from dialogue between opposing perspectives, rather than from monolithic doctrine,
that creativity requires tension between different possibilities, and that evolution depends upon the dynamic interaction between conservative forces that preserve valuable traditions and progressive impulses that encourage adaptation and innovation. The political applications of divine polarity teachings include governmental systems that incorporate checks and balances between competing interests, decision-making processes that consider multiple perspectives before reaching conclusions, social structures that honor both stability and change, while preventing domination by either extreme conservative or radical revolutionary forces that would eliminate necessary diversity and creative tension. The educational approaches that transmit knowledge of divine polarity include instruction in critical thinking skills that examine issues from multiple angles, experiential learning that explores different modes of consciousness and perception, and mentorship relationships that model integration of apparently contradictory qualities such as strength and compassion, discipline and flexibility, confidence and humility. The therapeutic applications of polarity work include healing practices that address imbalances through introducing missing elements rather than suppressing symptoms, counseling approaches that help individuals accept and integrate shadow aspects of personality, and group work that facilitates resolution of conflicts through finding common ground beneath surface disagreements, while honoring legitimate difference. The environmental applications of divine polarity principles include ecological practices that recognize the necessity of both preservation and change in natural systems, conservation approaches that balance human needs with environmental protection, and sustainability strategies that integrate economic development with ecological responsibility through finding creative solutions that serve multiple objectives. The future implications of divine polarity teachings include their relevance for addressing contemporary challenges that require integration of technological capabilities with spiritual wisdom, global cooperation with local autonomy, economic development with environmental protection, individual freedom with collective responsibility, through approaches that transcend simple either-or thinking, while embracing both and possibilities that honor complexity and promote genuine solutions.
In the eternal dance between Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, creative principle that drives cosmic evolution through the dynamic interaction between opposing forces, whose apparent conflict serves the deeper purpose of generating new possibilities and promoting spiritual development that could never emerge from static harmony or unchanging perfection. The smoking mirror that reveals divine truth reflects not only individual consciousness, but cosmic consciousness itself, inviting recognition of our participation in the eternal dance between shadow and light that shapes existence at every level, while offering opportunities for conscious collaboration with divine purposes that transcend personal limitations and cultural boundaries.